I am here today to show you how I made these Plumeria paper flowers, and this is part of my counterfeit kit duties over at the Counterfeit Kit Challenge, where we look at a real-world set of scrapbooking supplies, take some inspiration, like this Plumeria flower, and recreate it to make our own scrapbooking supplies.
Hello everybody, welcome to Crafty Soup. My name is Misty, where I create with paper and photos in artful ways.
As we take a look
At the supplies that we need for this flower tutorial, I will say that at the end of the video I have a couple of looks at some other things I made during this crafty session that will all be used with my current scrapbooking kit for the month. So when we're looking at making these flowers, I'm going to use a circle punch. I'm going to use a bigger one for the purposes of this video so you can see it better. I did use a much smaller punch for the example that I showed at the very beginning. And we're just going to use some scratch cardstock. And I prefer kind of a medium weight cardstock because if you get too thick, it's going to be hard to do the bits for the technique on this. You'll need water, a paintbrush, a paint palette, some colors of ink, tweezers will be very helpful, liquid glue, and then some kind of goodies to put in the center of your flowers. So let's start off with the paper. You can see that these Plumeria flowers have 5 petals. We are going to punch circles and then repunch those circles into flower petal shapes. I can get 2 petals out of each circle, which means I will need at least 3 circles for one flower. I'm going to do a couple of them here because I wanted to show you a couple of different issues with creating these flowers, and we'll get to that later. So I punched my 6 circles, and then this is how we're going to turn those circles into flower petals. I've showed this in previous videos, so maybe you've already seen it, and this is where the tweezers come in handy. We're going to put those circles back in the circle punch. Don't go past kind of the halfway point of the circle because you'll need to get equal sizes of these petals out of this one punch. So there we go. We've got one petal shape now, and you can see how that works. And we didn't go past the halfway point of the circle. So we're going to turn it around, stick it back in the punch, just about up to where we punched the first one, get our second petal, and then toss out that scrap left over. So there we go. We've got 2 petals out of our circles. My cardstock is light enough weight that I can double them up and punch 2 circles at a time into these petals. Now, with those 6 circles, I get enough for 2 flowers and 2 leftover petals. I will use those petals to make some more flowers down the road, and you'll see pictures at the end of this video of a whole array of flowers. All right, let's move on to coloring these. You can use whatever colors you want. Go ahead and look up Plumeria flowers online, and I found these ones with this color palette, so I'm going to work on recreating kind of that look. Now, I did go with very bold colors, which is not normally my thing. If you're not a bold color person, you can use bold colors. You just want to use less of the ink when you pick it up with your paintbrush. So you can see I'm working on one petal here where I'm adding color. Let's do another one where I add a clean layer of just water to my flower first, and then I tap in the colors to different areas and allow that color to bloom and merge together a little bit. And that happens if you let it dry naturally. However, you can speed up the process with a heat tool if you're like me and you're kind of impatient. So I have got all of my flower petals painted and dried, and now we're going to do the back side because you will see some of the back side of this. You can skip this step if you're not too worried about it. But if you do all the flower petals at once with this process, it really does go much faster. So I go ahead and paint my water over all of them. I will use all of my yellow and then clean my brush and then do all of my pink. And that saves me time and just how much I need to rinse off my brush in between steps. All right, everything is painted front and back and it's all dry, and you can look at each side and decide which side you want. I used a textured cardstock, so I'm going to choose the texture side to be face up in all of my flowers. And then here is how we put all of these flowers together. These are completely dry, but I want to just barely re-mist them with a little bit of water, and that's going to soften up the paper just a tad because we're going to curl this paper. I'm using the end of my paintbrush to do that. I am curling more on the pink top edge than I am on the bottom yellow edge, and that's going to help us assemble the flowers later. That's also kind of the style of how Plumeria naturally has a curve to it. So let's do it again. We're going to just barely mist it. I don't want it drippy or soggy or anything like that because that will cause the paper to tear. I want to make sure I'm folding all of these in the same direction every time. So I always want to make sure that I'm working on the left or right edge each and every time and working on the same color zone each and every time, because some plumeria flowers are totally white and you can just leave all of these petals white. All right, I have misted all of them at once to speed up the process, which you can totally do because they're not going to dry out in between. Okay, future Misty jumping in here with doing some more of these flowers. I am using this punch, which is just slightly smaller than the punch I used in the previous set of flowers. And then I'm also using a 1-inch punch to do these smaller flowers. And I'm going to be ink blending these ones instead of watercoloring. So feel free to color these up however you want. You could even just use colored cardstock. You don't have to do any of this coloring process at all. But I wanted to show you this particular one because this one actually is my favorite. So I've ink blended the bottom with some yellow, and then I'm going to ink blend the top with some pink, and that's going to blend in the middle to give me some orange. And that really looks a lot more like that inspiration flower that I had showed earlier. I'll pop that back up on screen here again. So here I go with this blending process, and I am using some small blending tools for this, so that is very helpful. When I start blending the pink in, you see I'm starting to get a little bit of an orange shade going on, but then I will go ahead and come back with the yellow brush again and really get that going on. So these are my favorites. I just wanted to show you this process as well. Now let's head back to assembling these flowers. All right, here are my petals and they are all dry, and we're gonna start assembling these. Now these are 5-petaled flowers, which can be a little bit hard to arrange spacing wise. If you have an even number of petals, you can just directly put the petals opposite of each other, but that's not the case here. So we have to kind of figure out a way to get these evenly spaced each time. So here I am just kind of doing it by eyeball, and you can see they're shifting and bumping and moving on me. So let me show you my tip for getting this job done. I pull out a pencil and I just draw a simple star on my paper. I am going to draw it big enough so it will be the size of the flower. And then if I align each point of the petal along the point of the star, we will be able to get these nicely spaced around. Now, Plumeria all curves in one direction, so you want to kind of work around the circle, keeping each of the new petals you add on top of the last petal. This becomes a little tricky when you put the 5th petal in, because technically it should be on top of the previous petal and underneath the first petal that you put in place. We'll talk more about that in a minute. All right, in the meantime, I am just going to add a dot of glue to these petals as I go, and then add each petal around so that it is matching up with the points of those stars, and that will get me a nicely spaced flower. All right, here's where I'm trying to put that last one in place, and it is really difficult to get it to tuck under the first petal and over the previous petal, but I just put it on top and it'll be fine. These are just craft supplies. But I do have a tip if you want to get them to look just a little more realistic. In the meantime, I've finished off my flower with something in the middle. Plumerias, the way they're shaped, kind of have a hole in the center of them as those petals twist around each other. I can't reproduce that, so I'm going to finish off my centers with an enamel dot or a sequin. All right, here is that tip I was mentioning. You can see how each of these petals kind of tucks under the previous petal. So when I put this one in, it will tuck under the previous petal, but then I can't get it to tuck over the petal next door because it's under everything. Or I can't get it to tuck under the previous one and then be on top of that one because everything's glued in place. So here is what I am going to do. I'm just going to slit this petal with a pair of scissors. And that is going to allow me, if you tip it sideways, you can slide it in place. And now part of the petal tucks over and part of the petal tucks under. Add some glue. Make sure you're adding it to the part that's going to touch the other petals. So one on top and one on bottom will touch the petals that it meets up with. Now you will see that slit line once the glue is dry, but because I'm adding embellishment to the center of my flowers, that will cover it up. So what do you think? Do you care about getting this detail? Do you think they look just fine as is? Would you use this bright color palette, or would you go for something milder? I'd love to hear all your comments on this project down below. But before we go, I wanted to show you those other creations that I worked on this time around. So I'm a little obsessed with hot foiling right now. So I used a Spellbinders set of foil plates, dies, and stencils to create this alphabet set. And here you can see what the just plain foil looks like. It's pretty intense when it is in this form, but you can use these stencils to go ahead and stencil over this with whatever color you want. I was inspired by some of the rainbow colors in the inspiration kit to do my stenciling. And then in the end, when everything is die cut out, you have a colorful set of alphas with some nice shine. I didn't stop there with the hot foiling. I took this phrase set and one more phrase set that is meant for scrapbookers. I went ahead and hot foiled that with the same hot foil. Look, it looks less intense here. And then I used the matching die to cut it out. And all of this was done on wood grain paper to match some phrase strips in the inspiration kit. All right, that wraps up what I have to share with you this time around for my monthly makes. I hope you got some ideas out of this, and I hope you give those Plumeria flowers a try. Until next time, I hope you have an artful day.